Tonight, we visit the Great Wall of China. It's that giant zigzag of ancient stone you've seen in postcards, drone shots, and if you're unlucky, your cousin's 45 blurry vacation photos. People call it the only man-made object you can see from space. Spoiler: you can't unless you have superhero eyes. It's become a global icon, the ultimate do not trespass sign. But here's the thing. You probably don't know the real story, not the Google in 5 minutes version. The Great Wall is less one wall and more centuries of patchwork construction, expansion, destruction, and rebuilding. A saga of empires, ambition, and a truly unreasonable amount of heavy lifting. If this little journey through history helps you unwind and drift towards sleep after a long day, tap that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you tuning in from, and how late is it over there? Now, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's quietly step back through the centuries together. Imagine the longest-running construction deadline in human history. You think your kitchen remodel is dragging on? Try a project where the first workers started in the 7th century BCE. The finishing touches came over 2,000 years later. It's like your contractor's great-grandkids showing up to install your cabinets. And the bosses kept changing. New emperors, new dynasties, new visions, which meant sometimes tearing down parts of the old wall just to build it again differently. From a distance, the wall looks peaceful, almost romantic, like a stone ribbon laid gently over mountains, valleys, and deserts. Up close, it's another story. Dust in your mouth, wind that slices through your clothes. The smell of sweat and rammed earth, and the constant thunk of chisels and hammers. The Great Wall was born in the grit of human labor, the clash of armies and the stubborn dream of controlling a horizon. But why go to such lengths? Was it really just to keep out invaders? Or was it a kind of ancient social media post showing off to the world? Look how powerful we are. We'll get into that soon. For now, picture a line of workers stretching into the distance. Soldiers, farmers, pulled from their fields. Prisoners in shackles, all hauling baskets of earth and stone under a sky that offered no shade and no mercy. Somewhere an overseer yells about deadlines, someone else faints from heat, and in the middle of it all, a man mutters under his breath that maybe, just maybe, a really big ditch would have been easier. Here's the twist. The Great Wall wasn't a single perfect wall running across China from the start. It was more like a Frankenstein of fortifications, watchtowers, trenches, and natural barriers. The Great Wall you picture today, the iconic stonework winding through the mountains, is mostly Ming Dynasty handiwork, finished in the 1600s. Before that, think packed dirt, wooden stakes, loose stones. Not exactly Instagram ready. And yet, for all its flaws, the wall became something bigger than its bricks. It was a promise, a threat, a monument, and a prison, all at once. It shaped the lives of millions, from emperors planning its reach to laborers who would never see home again. Every brick has a story. Some are about survival, some about sacrifice, and some about how politics can make people do some very, very exhausting things. So, lace up your imaginary boots, grab a canteen, you'll need it, and let's start walking. The wall's history is long, winding, and full of surprises, and I promise, it's not the tourist brochure version. Why build it in the first place? The easy answer is to keep the bad guys out. The real answer? Well, that's a bit messier. Picture northern China over 2,000 years ago. Scattered kingdoms, shifting borders, and a whole lot of open steppe to the north. That steppe wasn't just empty, it was home to fast-moving nomadic horsemen who could raid, vanish, and raid again before lunch. The farmers and townsfolk inside the Chinese states, they were sitting ducks. So, the wall began as a way to slow the raiders down, not stop them entirely, but buy time for soldiers to respond. If that sounds like an ancient version of an internet firewall, you're not wrong. Think of the wall as a massive, physical, you-shall-not-pass filter. It didn't guarantee perfect security. Determined intruders could still find gaps or bribe a guard. But it was enough to make a quick smash and grab much harder. And just like a modern firewall, it wasn't just about keeping threats out. It was also about controlling what went in and out of the empire. People, goods, news, and the occasional wandering diplomat. But here's where politics comes in. Defense was only part of the story. The wall was also an enormous billboard for imperial power, the kind you could see for miles. When a rival kingdom or wandering tribe approached and saw this vast snake of stone and earth cutting across mountains, it sent a message. We are organized, we are rich, and we have the manpower to literally reshape the land. Even if the military benefits were debatable, the psychological impact was priceless. In some ways, it was prestige architecture, like the pyramids in Egypt or skyscrapers today. You don't need a 500-meter-tall glass tower to run a bank. But building one says, look how much money we can pour into the sky. For an emperor, the wall wasn't just a barrier, it was a crown. It told citizens, your ruler protects you, and told enemies, your best bet is to turn around. And there was another angle. Control over the frontier itself. The wall wasn't just a fence, it was a stage. Border markets popped up near gates, tax stations monitored trade caravans, and watchtowers became mini command centers. Even peaceful contact with the north, like trading horses for silk, could be regulated through specific entry points. If you wanted to cross, you played by imperial rules. Of course, not everyone was convinced it was worth the trouble. Building and maintaining a barrier across thousands of kilometers meant draining resources from farms, mines, and treasuries. Some advisors argued that forging alliances or paying tribute to the nomads would be cheaper. Others feared the wall would create a false sense of security. But emperors who liked big, visible legacies tended to side with, well, the really big wall idea. Imagine standing in a dusty court, hearing the pitch from your military advisors. Your Majesty, it'll cost millions of labor days, thousands of tons of material, and more silver than we can count. And the emperor leans back and says, make it happen. That decision wasn't just about strategy. It was about pride, reputation, and the belief that the empire's borders were as eternal as the mountains themselves. So, yes, the wall was a defense system, but it was also a political stage, a customs checkpoint, and an ego monument all rolled into one. Which, to understand its story, we have to look at the people who made those calls. And the people who paid for them with sweat, muscle, and sometimes their lives. So, if the wall was equal parts fortress, customs checkpoint, an emperor-sized vanity project, the next question is obvious. Who was standing there, finger on the map, saying, build it here, and here, and here? The roll call starts in the Warring States period, centuries before China was unified. Back then, various kingdoms, Qin, Zhao, Yan, Wei, were already building separate walls for their own borders. These weren't coordinated master plans, more like neighbors on a street all putting up different fences, each convinced theirs was the best. But in 221 BCE, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, decided to connect and expand them into something much bigger. Qin Shi Huang had a reputation for thinking on a grand scale. This was a man who ordered a nationwide road system, standardized writing, weights, and currency, and built a mausoleum guarded by an army of life-size clay soldiers. So when his generals warned about raids from the Jiangnu nomads to the north, his answer wasn't a small fortified outpost. It was, let's link up the walls, extend them, and make a northern barrier so big, no one will mistake where my empire ends. Over the next 15 centuries, dynasties came and went, each leaving their own fingerprints on the wall. The Han dynasty pushed it westward into desert trade routes. The Northern Wei and Northern Qi patched and fortified it in troubled times. The Sui tried their hand at repairs, but the Ming dynasty took the crown for the most ambitious upgrade, replacing packed earth with stone and brick and adding those iconic watchtowers. If Qin Shi Huang started the wall, the Ming polished it into the version we think of today. Now, ordering a wall is easy when you're the emperor. Paying for it in both silver and human effort is another story. The labor came from every corner of the empire. Soldiers were assigned to construction duty when they weren't fighting. Farmers were pulled from their fields in the off-season, told that building the wall was part of their patriotic contribution. Convicted criminals were marched in chains to remote sites, their sentences replaced with years, sometimes life of labor. And in rare cases, skilled stonemasons and artisans were actually hired and paid, though most of the workforce didn't have that luxury. Imagine the mix of people on a construction site. A veteran soldier grumbling about missing his family, farmer worrying about the crops back home, thief who thought a few years in prison would be easier than this, and a stonemason who's just trying to do his job without getting crushed by falling rubble. They didn't all share the same reasons for being there, but they shared the same blistered hands, aching backs, and endless days under sun or snow. Let's zoom in on one of them for a moment. A worker named Liang. It's early morning in the Ming Dynasty, somewhere in the mountains. The air is sharp and cold, the kind that bites your nose. Liang wakes up on a straw mat inside a drafty barrack already dusty from yesterday's work. Breakfast is a thin millet porridge, barely enough to quiet his stomach. By sunrise, he's carrying baskets of stone up a steep slope, the rope straps cutting into his shoulders. The work is relentless. Teams pack earth between wooden frames or lay bricks one by one, while others mix mortar, haul water, or carve rock. Supervisors pace up and down, shouting orders, sometimes with a whip in hand, not to injure, but to remind everyone that stopping isn't an option. Liang doesn't think about the politics. Thinks about surviving until the next meal, and maybe, if he's lucky, getting reassigned to a watchtower crew, where the work is slower. By midday, the sun has turned the mountain path into a shimmering, breath-stealing oven. Sweat stinks his eyes. The smell of fresh mortar mixes with dust and the faint sourness of unwashed clothes. Breaks are short. A gulp of water if the barrels haven't run dry, and then it's back to lifting, hammering, hauling. Sometimes he trades a joke with the man next to him. Sometimes no one talks at all. The rhythm of the work swallows the hours. At dusk, the temperature plunges. Hands go numb, but the baskets keep coming. Only when darkness makes it impossible to see the next stone do they stop. Supper is another bowl of porridge or boiled greens, eaten in silence or with the low hum of weary conversation. In the barracks, Liang lies down, muscles screaming, and stares at the rafters. He wonders how much longer until his sentence ends, or if it ever will. Multiply Liang's day by hundreds of thousands, over centuries, and you get the real workforce behind the wall. Some went home when their duty ended. Others never left, buried near the work sites, their names forgotten, but their labor still standing in the stones. The irony is, the emperors, whose names are remembered, weren't the ones carrying the bricks. They were in palaces, hearing reports, issuing orders, and measuring progress on maps, yet without the anonymous hands of farmers, soldiers, and prisoners. The Great Wall would still just be a scattering of lonely forts. And it's worth asking, did those workers believe in the wall's purpose? Some probably did, convinced they were protecting their families and lands. Others saw it as nothing more than forced labor in service of imperial pride. History doesn't record most of their voices, but the wall itself, with every layer of earth and stone, is their testimony. The orders came from the top. The price was paid at the bottom. And next, we'll see how these workers actually managed to build such a massive structure with nothing more than the tools, materials, and muscle they had at the time. So, you've got an emperor with a vision, an army of workers who may or may not want to be there, and thousands of kilometers of wild terrain ahead. Now comes the real question. How do you actually build something like the Great Wall without bulldozers, cranes, or even a decent wheelbarrow? The answer? You get creative, painfully, back-breakingly creative. The first trick was choosing materials that matched the landscape. In the earliest stretches, especially under the Qin and Han dynasties, the go-to material was rammed earth. It sounds simple. You take dirt, sand, clay, and sometimes a little gravel, pour it into wooden frames, and pound it down until it's as solid as concrete. But here's the thing. You have to compact it layer by layer, a few inches at a time, with a heavy wooden or stone tamper. Imagine doing that for days, your arms turning into noodles, and you've only finished a few meters of wall. In rocky mountain areas, they used stone, big, awkward, bone-bruising blocks that had to be chiseled, pried, and dragged into place. In later centuries, especially under the Ming, the wall graduated to bricks and stone slabs, bonded with mortar. And no, the mortar wasn't your standard hardware store cement. It was a mix of lime, water, and sticky rice. Yes, sticky rice, which added surprising strength. Somewhere in there, some poor cook must have been wondering why his grain delivery kept disappearing. Transporting these materials was its own saga, forget diesel trucks. If the build site was near a river, they could float heavy loads on rafts, which sounds clever until you remember that much of the wall wound through dry, unforgiving landscapes. On land, Oxen and mules did the heavy hauling, but in the steepest areas, it came down to human muscle. Workers slung stones in baskets across their backs, hauled them up slopes with ropes, or formed long chains to pass bricks hand to hand. One Mangera account describes teams using makeshift wooden sledges to drag loads over snow in winter, a smart move. Until the snow melted, and everything had to be dragged over bare rock again, and the tools, primitive but effective. Iron chisels and hammers for shaping stone, wooden shovels for digging trenches, long poles with hooks to lift and place blocks. The tamper, that favorite of rammed earth construction, is basically a heavy log with handles, designed to be lifted and slammed down over and over. There was also a kind of early pulley system, using wooden frames and rope, to hoist materials a few meters up, though this was more for small loads than giant stones. Sometimes necessity sparked surprisingly ingenious solutions. In desert areas, where sand shifted to icily, builders layered reeds or tamarisk branches between packed earth layers to hold everything together. Think of it like ancient wall rebar. In mountain passes, they carved the wall directly into the rock face, creating natural fortifications with less need for masonry. And in windy steppe regions, they angled certain sections slightly to break the gusts that could knock workers clean off the scaffolding. Scaffolding itself was another challenge. Without steel pipes, they lashed together tall frames of timber, which swayed alarmingly in the wind. Standing on one of those, chisel in hand with a drop of 100 feet below you, was not a job for the faint-hearted. If you've ever stood on a shaky ladder to change a light bulb, multiply that fear by 10 and throw in a snowstorm. One thing that might surprise you is how much of the work was seasonal. In high mountain areas, winter was too harsh to keep building, so workers would stockpile materials and return when the thaw came. In the lowlands, summer heat could be brutal, so certain crews shifted to night work under torchlight. That must have been a sight, the dark ridgeline flickering with points of fire, the muffled thud of hammers carrying through the night. You might wonder how they kept the wall straight over such long distances. The answer, they didn't always. But when accuracy mattered, surveyors used ropes, compasses, and even water-filled troughs to find level ground. And if a section veered off, well, sometimes they just rolled with it. The wall's meandering path is partly a product of terrain, partly a product of good enough. Let's move on. The whole process was astonishingly slow. A good team could build maybe a few hundred meters of wall in a season, depending on conditions. And that's before you add in the time for towers, gates, and side fortifications. The Ming's watchtowers, for example, required careful bricklaying, spiral staircases, and roof tiles, all carried up by hand. If you've ever tried to assemble IKEA furniture without the right tools, you know a fraction of their frustration. Except their flat pack weighed several tons and came without instructions. Still, there was a rhythm to the work. Days began with the sound of chisels striking stone, the scrape of shovels, the low grunts of men lifting baskets. You could smell the dust before you saw it, a fine, dry coating that clung to skin and clothes. By midday, the sun baked the earth until it gave off a warm mineral scent. In the evenings, as the last loads were placed and scaffolds creaked in the wind, the air cooled and carried the sharp temps of lime from the mortar. What's remarkable is that despite their limited tools, these builders created something that's lasted centuries. Even the most weather-worn stretches of rammed earth still stand in remote deserts. It's a reminder that sometimes it's not the fanciest technology that wins, but stubborn persistence, the willingness to slam a tamper into the dirt 1,000 times and then do it again tomorrow. Of course, persistence has its limits. The terrain, the climate, and the sheer physical toll made the work brutal, no matter how clever the techniques. And that brings us to another side of the wall's story. Not the tools or the bricks, but the conditions the workers faced while using them. Because when you're balancing on rickety scaffolding in a dust storm, it's not just about how you build, it's about how you survive. Imagine waking up before the sun, not because you're some disciplined morning person with a meditation habit, but because someone is banging a drum loud enough to wake the ancestors. You roll off your mat. If you're lucky enough to have a mat, and the first thing that hits you isn't a gentle morning breeze, it's dust. Dry, sharp, get in your teeth, dust, and cold. Bitter cold that seeps through your clothes like they've been dipped in ice water. Or, Depending on the season, it's the opposite. A heat so intense you feel like you've woken up inside a clay oven. Welcome to another day building the Great Wall. The thing about the wall is that it wasn't built in one cozy location with a convenient snack bar and a shade umbrella. It stretched over mountains, deserts, river valleys, and places where even goats might look around and think, yeah, I'll pass. Workers didn't get to pick their preferred climate. One year you might be shoveling dirt under a burning sun in the Gobi Desert. The next you're hauling stones up a frozen slope in the Yin Mountains. The terrain was an equal opportunity punisher. Food was, let's just say no one was opening a 5-star restaurant along the wall. Rations were usually grains, millet or sorghum, boiled into a kind of thick porridge. If you were very lucky, maybe a scrap of pickled vegetable or a sliver of dried meat made its way into the pot. The smell was earthy, sour, and about as exciting as wet cardboard. But when you've been carrying bricks since sunrise, even wet cardboard starts to smell like a feast. Water was another story. Sometimes you had enough, sometimes you didn't, and sometimes it tasted like the bucket it came from. In some stretches of the project, especially across drylands, water was so scarce that men would march hours just to fill a jar, then march back while trying not to spill a drop. There's a story, part history, part rumor, about a group of workers digging desperately in the dust for any sign of groundwater. They were so parched that when they finally struck a muddy trickle, they drank straight from the pit, grit and all. Imagine drinking something that tastes like a blend of wet sand and old leather and still feeling grateful for it. That was the level of thirst we're talking about. And then there's the wind. Oh, the wind. In the desert sections, it wasn't just a breeze. It was like the land itself wanted you gone. Fine grains of sand blasted your face, your eyes, your ears, and somehow places you didn't think sand could reach. Up in the mountains, the wind could whip through so sharply it felt like it was trying to slice your nose off. If you've ever had to walk across a parking lot in winter with the wind in your face, multiply that by 10 hours, subtract the winter coat, and add 30 kilos of rock on your back. The terrain also played cruel jokes. One wrong step on a mountain slope and you weren't just dropping your load, you might be tumbling a few meters yourself. People worked in crude rope, sandals, or simple cloth shoes, which offered about as much traction as wearing socks on ice. If your foot slipped, the rocks you were carrying had no loyalty to you. They'd happily roll downhill, sometimes into the legs of the unlucky person behind you. Cue the kind of team-building exercise no one signed up for. And speaking of team building, the Great Wall was one of history's least fun corporate retreats. You had group activities like move this giant boulder together and pass buckets of dirt in a human chain. There were even trust exercises, except instead of falling backward into a coworker's arms, you were counting on the guy in front not to drop the log you were both carrying. Failures in trust weren't just awkward. It could mean a smashed foot, a broken arm, or worse. Illness was another constant threat. With poor sanitation and everyone packed together in rough camps, diseases spread fast. A fever or stomach sickness could knock you out. But rest wasn't really a concept unless you were completely incapacitated. The work was relentless. The wall didn't care if you had a cough. The overseer didn't care if you twisted your ankle. There was always someone ready to replace you if you fell behind, and often they'd be watching, waiting for your spot. In winter, frostbite nipped at fingers and toes. In summer, heat stroke hovered like an invisible vulture. A man might collapse from exhaustion, his body slick with sweat, lips cracked and dry, the taste of salt and dust on his tongue, and the line of workers would just step around him because stopping meant falling behind. Let's not forget the psychological toll. The wall wasn't going to be finished next week or next month or even next decade. You could spend your entire working life on one section and never see the whole thing. For many laborers, especially those sentenced as punishment, this wasn't a job. It was a life sentence. Imagine clocking into work one day knowing your great-grandkids might be the ones clocking out. But humans are stubborn creatures. Even in the worst conditions, they found tiny scraps of comfort. Maybe it was humming an old village song as you carried bricks. Maybe it was swapping stories by the fire at night, faces lit by flickering light, while the wind howled outside the tent. There was even a kind of dark humor among the crews. Someone might joke that the wall was the emperor's endless laundry line, or call a stretch of steep ramp heaven's staircase, while groaning under the load. That humor, sometimes bitter, sometimes absurd, was a survival tool, as important as any shovel or hammer. When you zoom out, the conditions these workers endured are almost impossible to replicate in the modern world without major safety violations, lawsuits, and about 1,000 HR memos. But back then, this was simply reality. No protective helmets, no steel-toe boots, no sunscreen, no hydration packs. Just human muscle, grit, and the kind of stubbornness you get when the alternative is worse. Perhaps that's why the wall still stands, not just because of the engineering, but because it was built by people who had no choice but to keep going. Through thirst, cold, heat, hunger, wind, sickness, and exhaustion, in a way, every gust of wind that still whips across those stones carries the ghosts of the people who endured it first. The wall is not just bricks and earth. It's a monument to sheer, unglamorous endurance, a reminder that sometimes history is less about grand speeches and more about surviving one more day. All right, picture this. You've been shoveling dirt in the blazing sun for 10 hours. Straight your hands are raw from the rope you used to drag a stone. The size of a small refrigerator up a slope that feels more like a wall than the wall itself. And you know there's still another load waiting for you tomorrow. Now multiply that exhaustion by days, weeks, years, and you begin to glimpse the human cost of the Great Wall. It's the part of history that doesn't make it into postcards or travel blogs, the blood, sweat, and sometimes literal lives that were baked into its bricks. The death toll is one of those historical debates where numbers swing wildly. Some records hint at hundreds of thousands, others whisper millions. Of course, nobody back then was keeping neat spreadsheets, and if they were, they probably lost them under a pile of sand. But there's a chilling old saying that captures the sentiment better than any statistic: one life for every brick. It's poetic, it's dramatic, and it's not entirely literal. But when you see the scale of the wall, it makes you swallow a little harder. And here's the thing. These deaths weren't just the result of a single cause. The wall was an equal opportunity killer. Harsh weather could take you just as easily as a collapsing rampart or a rock slide. Summers fried you like a dumpling in oil, winters froze you solid, and there was no sick leave in ancient imperial China. You got sick, you worked, you got injured, you worked slower, until someone decided you weren't working enough. And then, well, let's just say your contribution to the project became permanent in ways you didn't intend. It wasn't just the environment. Punishments for slow progress were legendary in their cruelty. Imagine a project manager who doesn't just threaten to fire you, but to fire you into a ditch. Supervisors, often military officers, kept a hawk's eye on output. If your section lagged behind schedule, the whole crew could be beaten, fined, or worse. It's not exactly the kind of team building you want to post about on LinkedIn. And in the middle of all this brutality, there's one story that has echoed for centuries, the legend of Lady Meng Jiang. It's part love story, part tragedy, part social commentary. The tale goes that her husband was sent, like countless men, to work on the wall. He never came back. When winter arrived and she hadn't heard from him, she made the long, punishing journey to bring him warm clothes. But when she arrived, she learned the truth. He had died and his body was buried within the wall itself. In her grief, she wept so fiercely that a section of the wall collapsed, revealing his bones. Now, historians will tell you that this is a folktale, not a diary entry. But it stayed alive for over 2,000 years because it captures something deeper than facts. It reflects the pain, the personal loss, and the quiet rebellions that often go unrecorded in official histories. And honestly, even if you don't believe the bricks literally gave way to her tears, you can't deny the emotional truth hiding inside it. Of course, you can't talk about this without remembering that deadline back then meant something very different than it does now. In our world, a missed deadline means a stern email or maybe a loss of bonus. In theirs, it might mean an actual line, "You were dead." It gives a whole new meaning to meeting your deadline. The emperors, they weren't shy about pushing. The wall wasn't just a defensive project, it was a statement. Slowness wasn't just inefficiency, it was disrespect to the emperor's will. What's remarkable, and a bit haunting, is that for all this sacrifice, the wall was never the work of one reign, one army, or one labor force. Generations came and went, each adding their own quota of stones and bodies. You could be born into a time when the wall was halfway through your village, work on it your entire life, and die with it still unfinished. Imagine growing up with a construction site in your backyard, and so could your grandkids. Now, before you think this is all doom and gloom, there's a strange, almost humbling thought here. These anonymous laborers, conscripts, prisoners, and soldiers didn't get monuments with their names. They didn't even get marked graves, but they're still part of something visible from space. Their work and their suffering outlived emperors, dynasties, and even the purposes for which the wall was built. That's kind of incredible, in a bittersweet way. There's also an odd sort of solidarity in imagining them. It's not the romanticized version of band of brothers you see in movies, but a quiet, stubborn fellowship born from shared misery. The man next to you might be a stranger from a province hundreds of miles away, speaking a dialect you don't understand. But you both know the taste of dust in your teeth, the burn in your back, and the weight of a stone that wants to roll downhill more than it wants to be part of a wall. That's a kind of connection no emperor can decree and no historian can measure. And yet the empire measured them in other ways, in quotas, in sections completed, in punishments avoided. No matter the personal loss, the wall kept going. The work never stopped for mourning. Lady Mengjiang may have collapsed a section in legend, but in reality, the machine of empire would have ordered it rebuilt before the dust settled. It's easy, sitting here centuries later, to judge that as heartless. But here's a gentle reality check. Our modern world still builds monuments, roads, skyscrapers, and still, somewhere, someone is paying a human cost for them. The difference is that the Great Wall makes that cost impossible to forget, because the structure itself almost feels alive with the weight of those who built it. When you walk on the wall today, you're not just stepping on stone, you're stepping on centuries of lives, on deadlines met and missed, on sweat that dried into the earth, on griefs like Lady Mengjiang's that might never have been told. And maybe, just maybe, that's worth remembering the next time you complain about having to work late on a Friday. You could say the Great Wall wasn't so much built as it was constantly upgraded. It's like a phone app that keeps releasing new versions whether you want them or not. Version 1.0, Qin Dynasty, around 221 BCE, Emperor Qin, Shi Huang, had just united China after a messy buffet of warring states. And he wanted two things: to keep nomadic raiders out, and to make sure everyone knew there was a new boss in town. His patch notes included linking older regional walls together and filling the gaps with brand new construction. The result? A vast snake of rammed earth stretching across mountains, deserts, and fields, not exactly scenic hiking trails back then. Now, Qin's wall wasn't pretty. If the Ming Dynasty's wall was an ornate stone castle, Qin's was more like hastily thrown up scaffolding. Rammed earth was cheap, quick, and could be done with the labor force he already had: prisoners, conscripts, and unlucky farmers. But it wasn't weatherproof. After a few decades of wind and rain, some sections looked like abandoned sandcastles. Still, for its time, it was revolutionary. A tangible, physical, you shall not pass that could be seen from miles away. Fast forward a couple of centuries to the Han Dynasty. These guys were like the ambitious tech startup that inherits a clunky old software and says, "We can totally fix this." Han emperors pushed the wall farther west into what is now Gansu and Xinjiang, hugging the roots of the Silk Road. This wasn't just about keeping enemies out anymore. It was also about showing traders that, yes, you were under the watchful eye and taxation system of Han authority. The Han walls were more than military defenses. They were supply chains dotted with forts and beacon towers. Soldiers stationed here could light signal fires that relayed danger across hundreds of kilometers in a matter of hours. Ancient group chat, but with more fire hazards. The Han also had to deal with brutal geography. Some stretches went through the Gobi Desert, where summer heat could roast you like a clay pot, and winter winds could slice through 10 layers of felt. To build there, they mixed sand, reeds, and gravel, layering them into sturdy, compacted blocks. You could almost call it the first eco-friendly construction method, if you ignore the massive human suffering involved. Skip ahead again, and the wall goes through a quiet period. Dynasties rose and fell, and some rulers decided the wall wasn't worth the upkeep. Parts crumbled, disappeared, or were cannibalized for local building projects. Imagine living in a frontier village and thinking, well, there's this pile of bricks just sitting here. Why not use it for my barn? Then came the Ming Dynasty, the wall's HD remake. After the disastrous Tumu crisis in 1449, Where a Ming emperor was captured by Mongol forces, the court decided they needed something stronger, taller, and frankly, more intimidating. This is when the wall became the iconic stone and brick behemoth we think of today. Granite in the mountains, baked bricks in the plains. With battlements, watchtowers, and garrison stations so soldiers could actually live and patrol there long-term, Ming engineers also added clever design tweaks, drainage systems to prevent erosion, sloped walls to deflect scaling attempts, and sturdy parapets for archers. It was the wall's premium subscription plan. The Ming didn't just build for defense, they built for show. Foreign envoys, traders, and even internal officials were meant to be impressed. Walking up to a Ming wall gate must have felt like arriving at an unbreachable VIP club, with guards in elaborate armor checking if your pass was in order. And unlike Qin's rough earth ramparts, Ming sections have survived centuries of storms and sieges, proving that, yes, sometimes a quality upgrade is worth it. But here's the funny thing. With each dynasty, the wall was never a single, unbroken line. It was more like a messy network, expanding, shrinking, and rerouting based on political needs. Qin's wall wasn't the same as Han's, and neither matched the Ming version. Some overlapped, others were completely abandoned. If you mapped them all together, you'd get a tangled branching system more confusing than your phone's photo album after 5 years without sorting. And here's a human side detail. Workers often had no idea they were part of a great national project. A Han farmer, drafted to pile sand in the desert, probably didn't think, wow, I'm contributing to a century-spanning defense network. He was more likely thinking, why am I here instead of planting millet? The Ming bricklayer carving battlements may have been muttering about the foreman's impossible deadlines, much like a modern construction crew on a delayed highway project. Through it all, the wall reflected the personalities and priorities of its rulers. Qin's wall screamed urgency and raw ambition. Han stretched with strategic trade vision. Ming stood as both fortress and monument to centralize power. Each left its fingerprints and its own layer of human sweat, tears, and yes, sometimes blood in the mortar. By the time the last major Ming restorations wrapped up in the 17th century, the wall had been under construction in some form for nearly 2 millennia. That's longer than the lifespan of entire civilizations. And yet, for all the versions and upgrades, its ultimate fate was the same. It couldn't stop history from moving on. The Manchu breached it in the 1600s, not by smashing through, but by slipping past via a bribed gate commander. Turns out even the best security software can be undone by a human clicking the wrong link, or in this case, taking the wrong bribe. But if the wall couldn't be eternal in purpose, it became eternal in symbol. Each dynasty's contributions stacked together into something that ironically outlasted all of them. Today, tourists walk Ming battlements without realizing they're stepping over the bones of Qin ambition, Han ingenuity, and countless forgotten hands. The wall isn't just one story. It's a bookshelf of dynasties, each writing a chapter in stone, earth, and brick. And whether you think of it as a military project, an engineering marvel, or the longest-running home improvement project in history, it's hard to deny every upgrade left its mark. Imagine you've been stationed on the Great Wall. It's not for a weekend shift or a month-long deployment, but for years, sometimes decades. No, you can't just work from home unless your home happens to be a freezing watchtower with no insulation, suspicious draft, and a constant smell of boiled millet. This is life on the frontier, where boredom and danger share the same address, and the nearest city might as well be on another continent. Mornings start early, the sun barely peeks over the horizon, painting the mountains in streaks of gold and ash, and you're already on your feet. Breakfast, a steaming bowl of thin millet porridge if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, it's cold millet porridge, left over from yesterday, now with a chewy texture that no Michelin guide would ever recommend. Boots on, more like stiff leather that rubs your heels raw. Grab your spear and it's time for inspection. The Great Wall wasn't just a defensive line. It was a living organism, manned by thousands of soldiers. These weren't the pampered palace guards in silk robes. They were men hardened by wind, sun, and a diet that seemed perpetually one seasoning short of tasty. You'd have archers scanning the hills, messengers riding along narrow paths, cooks stoking smoky fires in cramped corner kitchens, and blacksmiths hammering out arrowheads in the biting wind. Then came patrol duty. Picture pacing the same stretch of wall so often, you could probably walk it blindfolded without tripping, well, most of the time. Each footstep echoed off the stone, and the wind howled like it had been practicing scales all night. You looked out over endless mountains or grasslands, sometimes beautiful, sometimes barren. The landscape could lull you into a trance, till you spotted movement in the distance and had to decide. Is that a rider, shadow, or just another goat that somehow wandered into no man's land? The thing about the frontier was that danger came in two extremes. Either nothing happened for weeks, or everything happened at once. You could go a whole season seeing only the occasional trader or shepherd, then one night the alarm drum would thunder, torches would flare to life, and suddenly you were running to your post with your heart in your throat. Most days, though, life was a test of patience. There was only so much small talk you could make with the same dozen people before conversations turned into creative nonsense. Some garrisons invented wall games. Who could skip pebbles down the slope farthest? Who could keep a torch lit longest in the wind? Or who could carve the funniest face into the frozen latrine seat? Others turned to music, crude flutes, drum rhythms, or just loud singing to scare away the loneliness. And let's talk about the seasons. In winter, the stones under your feet froze so hard your boots might as well have been nailed to the wall. Your breath crystallized in your beard and the wind had a way of finding any gap in your clothing. Summer, the sun baked the wall until touching it felt like grabbing a hot wok, and you could see heat shimmer rising from the stones. Spring brought mudslides. Autumn brought dust storms. Basically, if nature had a mood swing, you were in the middle of it. Meals were simple. Millet beans, the occasional salted fish or dried meat, fresh vegetables. Only if the supply caravan made it through without being delayed or raided. Water came from wells or streams if they hadn't frozen solid or dried up. Tea was precious, often reserved for officers or special occasions. The rank and file. They drank hot water, because at least boiling it killed the bugs. Still, bonds formed on the frontier were like nowhere else. You didn't just know your comrade's fighting style, you knew his snoring pattern, his favorite curse word, the story he always told after 2 cups of wine. These were the people you relied on in the dead of night when an alarm call cut through the air. Out there, trust wasn't optional, it was survival. Every now and then, there'd be a bit of excitement that didn't involve arrows flying. Maybe a visiting official came to inspect the wall, causing a flurry of cleaning and rehearsed drills. Maybe a passing merchant brought gossip from the capital, along with a bolt of silk or a pouch of strange spices that nobody knew how to cook with. Festivals were rare, but treasured. Lanterns strung up between towers, a shared feast, music echoing off the battlements. For a night, the wall felt less like a fortress and more like a village in the clouds. And when the day wound down, the sun dropping behind jagged peaks, night duty began. The horizon faded into deep indigo, the stars blazed sharp and cold, and the torches flickered along the wall like a necklace of fire. You'd stand watch in that strange, suspended silence. Nothing but the wind, your own breath, and the distant howl of something you hoped was just a wolf. Life on the frontier wasn't glamorous, but it had its own rhythm. The Great Wall wasn't just a monument to imperial power. It was a community stretched thin across mountains and deserts, a line of human persistence carved into the earth. The men who lived here didn't just defend the wall. They became part of it. Stone by stone, watch by watch, day by day, they kept their posts. And maybe that's the quiet truth history sometimes forgets. For every battle cry or grand imperial order, there were years of unremarkable days, kept alive by grit, humor, and the stubborn refusal to abandon one another. In a way, that's a defense as strong as any wall. So after all that effort, decades of hauling bricks, freezing fingers, millet porridge, and soldiers developing the art of pebble skipping, did the Great Wall actually work? Well, the answer is yes and no, and it depends. Which is the historian's way of saying, buckle up, this is going to be complicated. On paper, the Great Wall was the ultimate security upgrade. It was like the ancient equivalent of installing a high-end password manager, 2-factor authentication, and one of those doorbell cameras that yells at intruders. You were a nomadic raiding party galloping in from the steppe. It was a nasty surprise to run into an endless line of stone and brick stretching across the horizon. Even if you found a way around, you'd have to deal with watchtowers signaling your every move to garrisons down the line. It was less, oops, we got spotted, and more, great, The entire Northern Defense Network just got a group text about us. But here's the catch. Walls don't move, and enemies. They tend to move a lot. Raiders could find gaps, bribe gatekeepers, attack in winter when patrols were weaker, or simply go around sections where the wall was unfinished or in disrepair. The Mongols, for example, didn't just stop existing because someone built a big fence. In fact, the Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, ended up ruling all of China without the wall stopping them. That's kind of like building an expensive antivirus program and then getting hacked by the guy who designed it. So militarily, it wasn't an impenetrable force field. It was more like a really good speed bump, slowing invaders down, forcing them into predictable routes, and giving defenders time to respond, and that time could make all the difference. If you're the commander of a border garrison, even a few hours' warning could mean the difference between a defense and a disaster. But here's where the Great Wall pulled off its sneakiest trick: psychology. To the people inside, it was a comfort blanket woven out of stone. To potential invaders, it was a silent, intimidating message. We're organized. We're ready. We're willing to spend generations stacking rocks to prove it. Even if the wall didn't physically stop every army, it projected strength in a way no simple open border ever could. Think of it like a giant "do not disturb" sign for the empire. Was it always obeyed? No. Did it still make people think twice before barging in? Absolutely. And it wasn't just military minds that were swayed. Traders along the Silk Road felt safer bringing goods into walled territory, which meant more commerce, more tax revenue, and more reasons for the emperors to keep the wall maintained. There's another layer to its effectiveness: internal control. The wall didn't only keep enemies out, it helped keep people in. Gates could be monitored, and traffic could be regulated. If you wanted to move armies, goods, or information, the wall became part of the empire's logistical spine. It was in its own way a customs checkpoint, a military highway, and a political billboard all rolled into one. Of course, there were the skeptics even back then. Maintaining thousands of kilometers of wall was expensive, astronomically expensive, and some argued the resources could have been better spent on mobile cavalry or diplomacy. Others saw it as an emperor's vanity project, a monument to power, rather than a functional military tool. And honestly, both views have a point. In the Ming Dynasty, when the wall reached its most iconic brick and tower form, it did manage to repel some significant incursions. There are records of battles where the warning system of smoke and fire signals worked flawlessly. Troops mobilized in time and raids were turned back before they reached the fertile heartlands. But there are also records of entire garrisons surrendering without a fight, or enemy forces slipping through less guarded passes. So again, effective, yes, perfect. It's not even close. The wall's value was as much about shaping the battlefield as winning it outright. By controlling where an enemy could cross, the defenders could channel them into ambush zones or delay them until reinforcements arrived. Imagine a giant funnel, wide open in the wild steppe, narrowing into heavily defended choke points inside the empire. The wall was that funnel, etched into the earth. And maybe the most underestimated part of its legacy is this: it gave generations of Chinese people a shared symbol. Whether you were a farmer in the south or a merchant in the capital, the idea of the wall meant safety, unity, and the sheer stubbornness to stand your ground against the vast unknown beyond the horizon. It was a story you could believe in, and stories, well, they can be as powerful as weapons. So was the Great Wall of China worth it? If you measure only in military victories, maybe not as much as the emperors hoped. If you measure in cultural identity, political cohesion, and the ability to impress both friends and enemies for centuries, then yes, absolutely. It was never just about keeping people out. It was about saying, this is where we stand, and the irony. The wall that once guarded the empire now welcomes millions of visitors every year, cameras in hand, climbing the same stairs soldiers once patrolled with swords. Which brings us to the next chapter. What happened after the fighting stopped? When the wall became less of a fortress and more of a memory you could walk on. And when the dust of battle finally settled, or the signal fires stopped sending frantic smoke messages across the hills, the Great Wall entered a different kind of history. It was no longer just a military barricade. It became something heavier, stranger, and far more enduring. First, the economics. A wall that once drained the empire's coffers in stone grain, and manpower started to pay back in unexpected ways. Merchants moving along the Silk Road found their journeys just a little safer under the watch of its towers. Settlements clustered near the gates, turning once barren stretches of frontier into bustling trade posts. Inns sprang up, where soldiers once stood guard, and you could buy everything from tea bricks to horse tack, proof that one person's fortification is another person's market opportunity. But it also had a shadow side. The wall didn't just protect trade, it could choke it. Imperial officials sometimes used it as a customs barrier, levying taxes on goods and people. If you were a trader, the wall might feel less like a guardian and more like a toll booth that stretched to the horizon. Socially, its impact seeped into everyday life. In villages near the wall, people grew up with its silhouette etched into the skyline, like a permanent mountain that humans had somehow decided to rearrange. Local folklore absorbed it. Every village seemed to have a tale of a relative who had hauled bricks, patrolled a watchtower, or vanished into the wall's construction. Even centuries later, in the Ming and Qing eras, poets wrote about the wall as both a symbol of national pride and a reminder of the blood price it demanded. And then came the slow fade. Without the constant funding and manpower of wartime, sections began to crumble. Earth-packed fortifications slumped into grassy mounds. Bricks were quietly recycled into farmhouses, pigsties, and village wells. Imagine building the world's largest security fence, only for your great-great-grandkids to turn parts of it into their barn walls. In a way, that's its own kind of legacy. Stone meant to stop nomads ended up holding up someone's chicken coop. But the wall was too big, too dramatic to disappear entirely. It morphed into a cultural monument long before modern tourism. For scholars, it was a metaphor machine, representing unity, stubbornness, and the sheer will to shape the landscape. For foreign visitors in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was a marvel that defied the stereotypes they'd carried from home. Missionaries, explorers, and curious diplomats wrote breathless accounts of clambering up weathered steps, imagining the centuries of eyes that had scanned those same horizons. Then came the tourism boom. By the late 20th century, sections like Battling were restored not for archers, but for tour buses. Suddenly, the wall's enemies were no longer Mongol horsemen, but selfie sticks. If you've ever been to one of those popular stretches on a summer weekend, you know the real battle is finding a patch of stone without a stranger in it. Tour guides with megaphones march groups up the slopes, teenagers in sneakers race ahead, and somewhere in the mix, someone in flip-flops inevitably regrets their life choices about halfway to the next tower. The wall, once a defense line, had become the ultimate cardio test. Economically, that transformation was huge. Tourism brought jobs, from restorators to souvenir sellers hawking authentic bricks. Spoiler, they're not. And it pumped money into both national coffers and local communities. The wall turned into a brand, appearing in films, advertising, and every bucket list article ever written. It's so iconic that China has laws to protect it, though enforcement varies, especially in remote areas where erosion and development threaten its less famous stretches. But maybe its biggest legacy isn't in yuan or Instagram posts, it's in identity. The Great Wall has become shorthand for the idea of a unified China, a visible thread linking dynasties, revolutions, and the present day. It's not just a pile of stone, it's a reminder of ambition on a civilizational scale. A reminder that humans will go to absurd lengths to feel secure, to make a mark, to say this is ours, and we are here to stay. And in an odd twist, the wall has also become a bridge, figuratively speaking, between China and the rest of the world. Visitors from every corner of the globe come to walk it, sweat on it, and leave with the same astonished thought. They built this. By hand, that shared moment of awe might be its most unexpected diplomatic achievement. If you strip away the myths, the wall's long-term consequence is this. It taught people how to think big. Not always wisely, not always efficiently, but big. It's a monument to scale, to persistence, and to the idea that some projects are worth finishing, even if the finish line is centuries away. And maybe, just maybe, it's a quiet reminder to all of us, whether we're building walls, bridges, or something else entirely, that the real legacy of a colossal human effort isn't just what it keeps out, but what it lets future generations see, touch, and imagine. And here's the thing. While the wall's postcard views are famous, the reality is way messier, and in many ways much more fascinating. Different from tourist advertising brochures, truth, it's a patchwork of walls, trenches, rivers as moats, and even stretches where nature itself, like jagged mountain ridges, served as part of the defense. Some sections zigzag awkwardly, not because the engineers were bad at geometry, but because they had to wrap around cliffs, ravines, and whatever stubborn villages refused to move. Even the materials vary wildly. In the desert west, you'll find walls made of tightly packed reeds, gravel, and tamped earth, more like giant sun-baked adobe loafs than the neat gray brick towers near Beijing. In places like Gansu, archaeologists have found watchtowers made of layers of reeds and willow branches, still clinging together after 2,000 years thanks to the arid air. And then there's the vanishing brick mystery. In the Ming era, when high-quality bricks were carted up from distant kilns, villagers sometimes borrowed them permanently to build their homes, pig pens, or garden walls. Imagine your great-grandfather saying, "Son, fetch me a stone from the Great Wall, we're patching the kitchen." And no one batted an eye. Some parts of the wall are downright bizarre. There's a section in Liaoning where the wall literally ends at a riverbank, as if the builders shrugged and thought, water's good enough. In other stretches, the wall runs into a cliff and just stops, because the cliff itself was defense enough. And in a few spots, you'll see gates leading to nowhere, built for the convenience of local officials rather than military strategy. Recent archaeology has only deepened the intrigue. In the last 2 decades, researchers have used drones and satellite imagery to map previously unknown stretches, hidden under grasslands or buried by sand dunes. They found evidence of ancient military posts that doubled as small farms, proving that soldiers weren't just guarding the frontier. They were growing vegetables, raising goats, and probably complaining about the weather. Some discoveries have even challenged long-held assumptions about its route, showing that the wall extended much further and in more complex ways than tourist maps suggest. And there's the animal factor. Excavations have revealed camel bones near some remote watchtowers, leftovers from the caravans that supplied the garrisons. In some cases, those bones are arranged in ways that hint they may have been used as construction supports. Yes, part of the Great Wall may have been held up by camel skeletons. Try fitting that into a history textbook diagram. So, after trekking through centuries of ambition, sweat, and the occasional camel bone, what do we make of it all? The Great Wall isn't just an engineering marvel. It's a biography of human determination written across mountains and deserts. It's the sum of countless individual lives. The soldier standing night watch with frozen hands, the laborer tamping earth under a blazing sun, the poet scribbling verses in a drafty watchtower. Every brick, every packed layer of soil carries a fingerprint, a story, a moment in time that outlived the person who placed it there. And maybe that's the quiet truth behind all great projects. We tend to focus on the rulers who ordered them or the wars they were meant to win. But what survives is often the work itself, bearing the marks of ordinary people. The wall is a monument not just to defense, but to persistence. It reminds us that human beings, for all our flaws, have an incredible capacity to work together towards something bigger than ourselves. Sometimes for survival, sometimes for pride, sometimes because an emperor said so and we didn't have a choice. If you ever walk along its stones, you'll notice something. From up there, the view is vast, the wind sharp, and the wall stretches in both directions until it melts into the horizon. In that moment, you might feel small, but in the best way. Small in the face of history, of time, of human effort that refuses to fade. And maybe that's the wall's greatest gift, a reminder that our own lives, too, are bricks in something larger. So, next time you're staring at a daunting project, whether it's a business, a piece of art, or just finally cleaning out your garage, think of those builders who kept laying bricks through snowstorms, droughts, and imperial deadlines. Because history tells us one thing for sure: walls eventually end, but the stories we build along the way, those can last forever.